way. And because the sole, the very thing I love about these shoes, caught just on the edge of that. And you have to understand my shins, they are really bony, okay? And with that metal edge caught my shin. This is how I started the whole seminar. It was so painful, but God knew I needed that. That's been my life. God knows I need these stimuluses to really, rise to the calling. Devon, he's using, I'm like watching him grow in this whole mission. I mean, he knows that I say, man, if you're in this room, you've been called here. Do you believe that? Yeah. See, I believe it because, my wife and I, for the last 2 months, have been praying you all into this room. I mean, with that said, right, hard work, man. We have a team of people, that's reaching out to people. But it's the prayers that, really get those emails, put you in a state, connect with you because God's answering your prayers. All of that is absolutely so divine, and you end up here. So every time I do a talk, I pray for the people in the room. I prayed for you all. I pray you, as Devon said, I pray you have the courage to step in the calling and ultimately the promise God has for you. And I'm an emotional day today because we shot episode 300 on Cell TV. And yeah, amazing. And that wasn't why I was emotional. It was because it was my wife and my son Daniel between us. And we told that story in its entirety. And as you know this, it was our saying, our mantra was from pain to purpose. And my wife got up one day and said, there's no more pain. It's just from purpose to promise. And we had so many of you all that love us, say, you got to drop the pain. We've had a lot of pain, and just telling that story and watching Marilee get emotional in it has, had me emotional all day. And I can honestly say this, I don't know. My father raised me with such a moral standard, and because I had dyslexia, I had major insecurities because I was the guy who couldn't read, and because of that, you have these wounds that go on even as an adult. And I can tell you that we compensate for those insecurities, and part of my compensation was that, that I was stronger, faster, and I could excel in those types of things, and I used it for good and not so good. But the bottom line is that when I got sick, God broke me there, and I became the weakest person I knew, and so that identity was shattered. I had a false identity. I didn't know myself at all, and I definitely was portraying someone that God didn't want me to be. And then my father, as I pointed out, raised me with that nothing's more important than your reputation. Oh, geez, so my headlines read, chiropractor steals from orphans when we adopted the twins and we were in that battle, and God had purpose in that too. Because there went the reputation. And I literally had to, unfortunately, at the time, thinking, unfortunately, I'm going to have to become myself. Who God created me to be. I say all that to say I stand here because, once I became who God created me to be in my thinking, then he started to use me. And, our last mastermind, right, guys, we talked about that. Walking into that identity. And I love telling the story about David because David in the Bible, he didn't know who he was. He was raised as a bastard son and treated that way. When Samuel came to anoint the king of Israel, Jesse had 8 sons. And he went down the list. Not that one. Not his oldest. And he went down the list and he said, it can't be, I don't have any more. Oh, maybe David's in the, see, he didn't even consider him his son. He said, go get him. And when David came back, he was anointed king of Israel. But he didn't really know what that meant. So David functioned in this insecure David because of the way he was raised and the identity his brothers and loved ones gave to him. And David was screwing up his own calling, his own promise that God had for him and what God wanted to do for him. God knew what he was doing. And The day that David finally perceived himself as the king of Israel. Not only did David's life change, but also the nation of Israel. So this weekend, you have to perceive yourself as God sees you. You have to see yourself in that calling that Devon said. You have to walk into the calling. And I can tell you this, you hear every time you're about ready to enter a promise, the resistance comes, the fear comes, etc. If you leave here this weekend and you do not plug in to what we have, something God's doing through us. You saw these gals up here. They're impacting beyond their communities at this point, obviously. And we have others in our group, in the Platinum group, that are doing the same at a big level. That's what we're looking for. Not every one of you is called to be a Platinum, no doubt. You'll see, we have obviously TCD, which many of you are already there. I spoke to you this afternoon. And we also have an accelerator program that's new that many of you will choose to plug into, which, by the way, something you're going to learn tonight is actually part of that. And then, of course, we have our Platinum program. And many of you, I asked the TCD people, the True Cellular Detox group that was here training this afternoon, how many of you know the difference of True Cellular Detox and Platinum? I think 3 people's hands went up in the whole room. So the point is this weekend, you will have that opportunity to know. And David, some have seen David. He's one of our business coaches in Platinum, and he has a team here. You will be blessed. You have basically a scaling meeting for them to see where you fit in. But if you do not find a place to fit in, we have brought you in at every different price point. We have everything where you could fit in to bring this mission. I have to believe, and I know for a fact, that we have something that is very unique and something that, no doubt about it, is an answer, a very unique answer to a devastating problem. You know, I was going to start this by giving some health statistics. I even researched them up, was pulling them up, and I'm, holy cow. I mean, when you look at where we're going to be as a country 10 years from now, at least where it's predicted, with dementia and Alzheimer's, I'm like, it's unbelievable. I mean, you want to just shake everybody. And with the autism statistics, 1 in 32, and you look at these numbers, you know what? But I said, you know what? I'm not doing it. Because this group, you all know that, and I feel like it never impacts anywhere. You know, it's like I said this afternoon, my children who are in the back, tell me, Dad, everyone we know takes Adderall to take tests and then to go to sleep because they can't focus is the point. So they're relying on medication, and then to go to sleep they're using marijuana. I mean, what's happening to their brains? And they're medicated in every way, vaccinated to the, up to here. What's going to happen in 5 years, 10 years? I'm telling you, and I've been saying this for how long, and I'm right. Because look what's happening. I can tell you that every answer that you're going to learn this weekend, it's come through a lot of prayer. And I didn't choose it. He chose me. But he also chose you. He chose me for a part of it, but I can't do it. So that's why you're here. So walk into that promise, but rock kazakamats, and y'all know what that is. God's already gone before you into that promise. And he's beat back the fears, beat back the enemies. Everything he has done for you. Everything. But you have to choose it, as Devon said. Walk into it. But he's already done it. It's only our fears that keep us there. Believe me, to join Platinum, it's not even a financial issue. The Platinums will tell you that. If you're qualified and they feel that that's based on your goals and what you want for your life and your practice of whether you fit in. The finances take care of themselves. And that's what part of Platinum is, business coaching, mindset coaching. We do retreats together. We grow together and we're a family. If you're called to that, step into it. The rest will happen, I assure you. But you're here for a reason. When I say that we have a unique answer, how many of you have not seen me or understand when I talk about the three-legged stool? How many? Okay. The three-legged stool it puts into context everything that we do. It puts into context how people are getting sick today, how disease arises, and it puts into context, more importantly, how to get well. Meaning that if we don't deal with every one of these issues, the stool falls over. People come from me with different illnesses, different problems, and they're doing maybe one at best of those causative factors. So the causes, what are they? We know that a certain gene gets turned on. We know that. It gets triggered. Epigenetics. I mean, I know there's all this fancy research and SNPs, and there's, some absolute clues there, and it's a lot of fun. But we know that epigenetics can go around those things. And that rules. The body has an amazing ability to adapt. We're just learning how the body goes around certain SNPs to fix itself. But it gives us clues, and it may even give us some leverage and help some people, so I'm not against it. However, what I am against is functional medicine now is running all these fancy tests, and they're really forgetting about what turns on the gene, which is the center leg, right? The stressors, physical, chemical, emotional, will trigger a gene, especially when they build up, right? Like we all have different stress buckets. And when that bucket fills, boom, it overflows, and that's when things start happening. The symptoms start. Most America is just medicating those symptoms away. But you know what's happening in our field? They're doing the same thing with supplements. Even the best functional medicine doctors, people are coming to me, and also the platinum, and they still have a mouthful of silver fillings. They were detoxing? That's the stupidest thing. Meaning that, like, okay, I'm not saying you don't do some detox while you're doing this, especially just opening up pathways. All that's good. But looking for an outcome of a lasting result without getting to the cause, it's ridiculous. It just goes against everything that I intuitively know, and I'm sure you too. Or they have massive infections in their mouth, never looked at. They never had a cone beam, and they're not getting well. Some it helps a little bit. Address the adrenals, that helps. The thyroid, they're on that thing. Hey, that helped. Hey, I'm doing this now. I'm doing testosterone pellets. It's boom, ba boom, ba boom. And they're taking a lot of stuff, but they're not getting to the very stressors that actually turn that on. We focus, and I train a lot right here, that's for sure. Oh, and by the way, the 5 R's is really how we turn off genes. Saturday, I'm going to show you some science that, listen, it'll rock your world. Admittedly, it might be a little heady, but I promise you, hang in there. You're going to want to hear this information. But the point is with those 5 R's, we can detox a cell, but we also have the ability to turn off these genes. So that has to be a part. So draw your own stools, because if you want the most out of everything that I teach this weekend, if you draw the stuff that I tell you to draw, so everyone draw a stool because it gets in your head. And then draw the gene leg. You can just write DNA if you want. Draw stressors. And think of physical, chemical, and emotional stressors. We'll be talking a lot about that on Saturday. And then finally, it's the gut and the microbiome that play a big significant role of what's being triggered. But again, people are doing all of this bacterias and all this stuff for the microbiome, but ultimately if you don't remove the stressor, you're not going to fix the microbiome. And again, the microbiome then has an effect on the genes. So all of these things are connected. But how we train to fix the microbiome is one of tonight's topics. And it's ancient healing strategies, fasting strategies, feast famine cycles. So we're going to start this stool basically right here. Saturday, we're going to dig deeper into these 2 legs. So understand the context of everything. Put all this together, and it's what we call a multi-therapeutic approach. Pompa protocol, as some say. But the fact is if we don't address all of it, our buckets will fill, and then the symptoms start. Once that happens, then the gene gets triggered. Now, I have to say, you've heard me talk about these 3 evils that are different than other toxins. And I'm going to build on that more on Saturday, but you're going to hear us talk about these hidden pestilence, aka hidden infections. A defiled place, what's that, do you think? Mold. And the god of deception, what do you think that is? Yeah. Can you believe the three big ones that truly send the bucket overflowing? They're different than other toxins. These are different. These are the three that, ironically enough, most practitioners are ignoring. Where are these hidden infections? Most often in the mouth. And Dr. Caitlin and Dr. Jerry are going to talk more about that. But it's impossible to get well, especially once you have these other stressors that you probably got in utero from your mom. And then as life goes, we accumulate more. Oh, and then you live in a moldy home. And how many lives are ruined because you don't see mold. But yet, God talks deeply about how devastating and evil it is. And it ruins lives. And of course, mercury is in so many things and in so many of us just because we were born. Because most of it is inherited in utero. Those three toxins just happen to be the most evil. Just mold only grows in dark places. Isn't that weird? Out of the light. It's really odd, but it's true. And it just is so absolutely bizarre of how it affects people and that God warned about it in the Bible and the hidden infections and the pestilence and how they are hidden and no one wants to deal with these three, the most dangerous of all, ironically enough. And there's just some of the sources, of other hidden infections, right? Lyme disease, so evil, so absolutely evil, and it's co-infections, root canals, cavitations, all of these things. Glyphosate makes it all worse. So now we've added one more thing to the mix for this generation. We've added a chemical that we're spraying on all of our food. And it opens up the protective barriers. This study was 2012 study from Stephanie Seneff, senior scientist at MIT. And that study was the first to show that glyphosate opens up the blood-brain barrier and allows these other toxins to cross deeper into the brain. She believes is one of the big problems that we're seeing with dementia, Alzheimer's, and autism. So that becomes the perfect storm. And the perfect storm is exactly what's happening to people. Meaning, it's never about the one thing. The wife or the husband has 8 fillings in their mouth. He's not sick yet. She's not sick yet. Until they have another stressor. And it's typically one of those 3 evils. It's not just the chemicals, the BPAs, the things that fill the bucket, no doubt. But it's a stress. So the 3 chemical stressors are typically the 3 that I just showed you that have the ability to just create that perfect storm. Chemical, physical, and emotional. And if you look at it this way, mercury, mold, Lyme, an emotional episode, any of those can create that catastrophic storm that takes place. When you hear about the perfect storm in the movie, I thought they described it well, right? It's like 3 weather fronts come together. And what happens is a synergy of power. And boom, it creates the storm of the century. And this is what we see in people's lives every day. When you dig deeper and truly you're asking causative factors. So one of the things we train on is how do you dig and find those sources? Whether it's a moldy basement or an HVAC system that got mold and they never knew it because they don't even smell it anymore because they're just immune to the smell. Or have hidden infections that they've had their jaw for 20 years and are just now spilling their bucket over. Right? So you start to interview people for these types of things. It could be 2 chemical and 1 emotional. It could be mercury, lead, and then they get a mold exposure. It could be mercury, lead, and they get a dental filling or a root canal. Boom, perfect storm, triggers the gene, and now the person's sick. Does it make sense to you? So always, little stool right there is what we always put in. And so just in review, once again, we have a gene that gets turned on, we have the stressor that triggers the gene, and then we have the gut that plays such an important role in the immune system and turning on genes that we have to address it. Okay, so that is in context. So once again, very important. Tonight, we're talking about fasting strategies that really is how you fix the gut. These ancient healing strategies. We're going to learn a lot about ketosis tomorrow. We have other people speaking on that. But tonight I'm going to talk about fasting and feast-famine cycling, diet variation is the real way that we fix this microbiome. And then Saturday, we're going to get to these. Everyone with me? Yeah. All right. And I said this in the beginning. You have to ask yourself this, and I want you to ask yourself this through the weekend. Where do I fit in? Okay? The journey is yours. True Cellular Detox, many of you here already. This is the new accelerator program that you'll hear more about, and then the Platinum program, you'll get to hear a lot more from our Platinums this weekend. Well, this is the first question here, well, second really. We're all programmed to fast. Are you fasting? Let me ask this question, because tonight's talk is more about, you know how to intermittent fast daily. We're doing it this weekend as Live It to Lead It. We're not, tonight's your last meal, right? My last meal was this afternoon. We're not going to eat again until tomorrow. And here for the first time, you'll get to experience the Catabo shake that we're using in a partial fast. And Dr. Shane is going to talk more about how partial fasting has been a part for many years of our protocol and when to use that. So it's part of tonight's conversation in that it's a 5-day fast. We just eat a little bit of food with some rules around calories and protein and carbs. But how many of you have done a 5-day fast? How many of you haven't yet? All right, that's probably 25, 30% of the room. So you may not be ready. That's what my book, which you're going to get a copy of tomorrow, thank God, an edited version, right? Thank God, yeah. Well, at the last seminar we just wanted you to have some of the copies, and bless y'all, and it wasn't professionally edited at that point, but this one, it has a lot more information. The editing's all done. We had some printing tragedies, but Rakazakamas. Here it is. So anyway, the bottom line is there it is in its new cover. But I asked the question, are you fasting, for a reason? Because we all are genetically programmed to fast. That's the truth. And when we don't, it sets up problems. Here's why. Simply put, we have to clean up our DNA. It's part of the legs of the stool, right? So one of the best ways to turn off bad genes is fasting. But as you'll learn this weekend, it's multiple fasts. And that's what every ancient culture was forced to do. Whether it was a partial fast or whether they were saving food supply, whether it was a full fast, the Huns of people, they made it part of their culture because they realized at some point that it made them better, and it worked with, how when spring came and they ran out of food. But we realize now that that's why they were the healthiest culture. So fasting is in our genes, and when we don't fast, we know that we create problems. Matter of fact, when I found that research article right there, it explains something that I already knew, is the fact that the last half century has brought stark changes in lifestyle to depart from normal diurnal cycles, periodic fluctuations in food availability, meaning we don't ever not have food anymore. That's a problem, because they said we're constantly in a feast environment. The cellular consequences may be an increase in the risk for several diseases, including cancer. So basically they said because we don't go through these times of stress anymore, where we have the lack of food, we're creating disease. And it's been shown now again and again. So feast and famine extends our life and prevents disease. So here's what's happening today. Obviously obesity and other diseases, this is just the example here. What happens is they feast, and what happens is they never famine. So they feast, which without famine leads to obesity and cardiovascular disease. But because we're not having the famine cycles, we're not changing our protein sparing and fatty acids, increasing our good fatty acids, teaching our bodies to burn fat for energy. So the bottom line is we're meant to feast, famine, feast, famine. if we miss the famine, we're bisecting into disease. The key to living longer, every study shows it's about eating less. And again, you've heard me say this because I love saying it. It's not necessarily about restricting calories, because we know that our metabolism gets lower and lower and lower if we keep restricting calories. It doesn't work long term. The metabolism, you can be eating 500 calories and literally eating your muscle and gaining fat. Does not work long term. However, eating less by eating less often or short times of famine works. There's a lot of science here. Not sure where to point this. I'm sure back there. Did it move? No? Just go ahead, change it. You might want to come check this out if I hit something. I don't think I did. This project, the Biosphere 2 project, really proved, because the science, when they realized, okay, we can extend animals' lives by extending the calories 25 to 30%. So they decided, let's do this in humans. And the biosphere was created, perfect environment. We're going to see all these amazing genetic changes, people living long, same thing we saw in the animals, but the fact was it didn't work. It was a fail. This 2-year project, the people came out emaciated. They came out basically more vulnerable to infection. Their immune systems were severely compromised. Oh, but they did notice some upregulation of some genes that would help them live longer. But would they have? No, they wouldn't have, because they were actually more prone to infection. It was a fail, bottom line. What went wrong? They did caloric restriction too long. The fact is that's not the way it happens. You don't push food away to live longer. You either do it by eating less often, or the key really, as we're finding out, is having short periods where you either don't eat fast or much less. So therein lies the key. I already talked about the Hunza people, because they thought it was their diet that was the key. But actually it was something that they call starvation spring. That was really the key to them living longer, is every spring they would fast. I experienced it. This tribe, when I was in Africa, actually had just come out of the mountains, not many months before I got to visit them. And when they came out of the mountains, they didn't even have the clothes that you saw there. They got those from World Vision. But the fact was that they were just on a major fast. They had fasted. They would gather. They were basically doing feast famine as a part of their survival. It was pretty fascinating. They also just ate one big meal a day. But most of the time we see this, it's forced or it's part of their culture. Today, we don't have that. We're not forced, and it's definitely not part of our culture. So, my 20 years experience with fasting started with a fascination with the innate intelligence. Look, you can't outguess the innate intelligence. Would you agree with that? Yes. No pill. There's always a time in emergencies, whatever it is, there's a time to jump in, if you will, in emergencies. But ultimately, the body always wants to survive. The innate intelligence knows what it's doing. I always say that if a chiropractic adjustment is removing interference and allowing the innate intelligence to flow, fasting harnesses that innate intelligence. Because in a stressed situation of a fast, the innate intelligence goes at its best. And really the reason why fasting works is because, just like exercise, it's a stress. And the body does these things to survive. But those things it's doing to survive are the very things that extend your life. The very things that turn off your bad genes that get triggered. The very things that reset your microbiome. It's doing all of that, like exercise, to survive. And that adaptation, the survival mechanism, just happens to make us healthier and live long. That's why with fasting, you can see autoimmune just turn off. But typically, it takes multiple fasts, and that's what we're going to talk about. So my wife gets a probable cervical cancer diagnosis, And I am studying, this was in the 90s, I'm studying fasting and fascinated with it because my whole philosophy I was so passionate about, if the body can heal itself. And fasting was just so right to me, intuitively. And my wife gets this diagnosis, so guess what I do in my passion, and I just jump in. My son jumped off a cliff because he has my DNA. We just jump in, man. Sometimes we have to stop and think because I made myself sick too many times. But the bottom line is that I jumped in and I was like, we're not doing this. And he's like, well, you're going to regret it. We walk out, you're going to fast. And my wife's like, yeah, okay, because she didn't want to do that anyway. So she fasts. She fasted for about 12 days, and we kept getting tests. And the bottom line was that she never did go, because one of his words were, you'll be back. Well, we never went back. And her diagnosis cleared out. Every test got better and better. And fasting then became a great passion. And then, I have to say this, I transitioned at that point. It started transitioning into my practice, and I was just all in, believe me. And I have to tell this story. This woman had a grapefruit-sized tumor. Now, she had already abandoned what they were doing in the hospital, and she was done. And she wasn't going to get another surgery. It just kept growing back. And so I said, you got to fast. Really? I'm like, yeah, read this. You got to do this. Read that. And she was all in. She was one of those. And so she did. And by day 2, she was sick. Day 3, she was more sick. Day 4, she was actually even more sick when most people would go, I feel good by now. Day 5, 6, 7, she stunk so bad, her family had to create cross ventilation actually to blow the stink out of the house. After a week, she started getting energy again, so she started bounding into the clinic, except she had a brown, fuzzy tongue that turned green and then black, and it was absolutely horrific. But she was bounding at that point, right? As it turned out, the doctors were like, okay, they were all for her fasting, and they didn't care at this point because she was like, their treatments didn't work and she was abandoning them with that. But the bottom line is they were doing tests for her, and her tumor would just keep shrinking. And she fasted 26 days, and it was the size of a golf ball when she finished. We recouped her in about 2-3 months, and we did another fast, this one about 14 days, and it went away completely. So I tell you all that to say I've had just so many amazing stories that happened early in my love for fasting. But here's the problem. It was me and some geeks from the Natural Hygiene Society. I'm telling you, it was all like me and these skinny vegans, and it was like, but I loved it. I was like, I loved it. And I just necessarily didn't agree with their diet, but I loved the fact that we all surrounded by fasting. And, I read all of Shelton's books, and, I dove in. I went to fasting clinics, and I wanted to know everything that they were doing, right? That's where I was. To fast forward, today it's finally in vogue. Oh my God, I can actually talk about it from stage. I never thought this day would come. So I'm glad that we are here. But I will say this, you are not going to get people well today because of the gut issues, because of the epigenetics, because of the toxic issues without fasting strategies in your clinic. You need it. You do. You need it. The human body needs it. Healthy people should be fasting. I do. My wife and I do 4 a year, 2 water, 2 partial. And we rotate it. Every fast, your body gets healthier and healthier and gets rid of more and more bad cells. So many reasons to fast. Obviously, one of my favorite is the big word, autophagy. The body gets rid of the bad cells and the bad DNA. Y'all know it. I'm not going to teach you about autophagy, right? Of course, it's just so simple. The innate intelligence needs nutrition. So what does it do? It gets so smart that it won't cannibalize your good cells. Of course not. It'll take muscle out maybe for a day at best. Oh, when you go into a fast, fat adapted, like my book, it's a 7-week program, and you go through a week at a time, you don't just run a marathon, right? You don't. You train for it. If you did my son Daniel's workout in the gym, you wouldn't have a good result at all. Your body would be too much. You would actually have a negative reaction. You wouldn't help yourself, you would hurt yourself unless you build up to that. So we don't just fast like so many people do. You build up to that fast. And now your body's fit enough to maximize the benefit. What takes 4 days for the average person, when you follow what I have in the book, starts happening one day. Day 1, you start into max autophagy. If you're healthy. If you're not, you need more detox typically ahead of time. But the autophagy process is to save your life. Your body gets its nutrition from your bad cells. I don't know, 4 seminars ago, do y'all remember? Some of you, it'll be interesting to see how many people. Remember the guy who was on 121 days of a fast, right? Yeah. And his nutrition markers, his doctors were amazed because they kept getting better. They're scratching their head because, see, they're on the old thing of you have to eat to get nutrition. Well, that man had enough nutrition on his body, and he lost about 100 pounds of that nutrition, about 121 days in. But I also taught him that day what to look for when your innate intelligence knows it's had enough. The body tells you when it's done. But if you don't know what that is, then you can end up in trouble. And you can cross into a primordial state. You don't want to cross into that. So that's why supervised longer fasts are very important like that. So stem cell surge that happens, the body's so smart, it doesn't just take away the bad cell, it replaces it with a new one. So that's how that guy's, every one of his blood tests that were bad were getting better and better and better, and his nutrition was getting better and better. His body was eating the bad and creating the new. Simple as that. Here's the mistake that maybe I made early in my career, is that one fast, it's so powerful, will get people well. I don't really do long fasts anymore with people. I teach them to do multiple shorter fasts. Years ago, we found that 5-day water fast or 5-day fast, because even then we were doing partial fasting, was the best. Why? Because it would take people 3 days. Day 2 was not good. Day 3 was not good. Day 4, somewhere in day 4, they broke out of their shell. And I tell the story about my son Simon, that he went 11 days, and he kept saying to me, what day am I going to feel better? Because I don't feel good now. Day 4. What day? Day 4. So Simon has to hear things again and again. It was day 4, he got up. You're wrong. Still feel like crap. 3 hours later, how you feeling? Still bad. You're wrong. Sometime in the late afternoon, he was outside running around. So the bottom line, though, is the reason we did 5-day fast was because of that. Finally, day 4, they break 3. And we didn't know then it was autophagy. The max day of autophagy kicks in around day 4, and then max stem cell day 5. But back then, we didn't know that. We just said, let's give it one more day of that breakthrough day. And 5 days was very obtainable. So we just kind of settled on 5-day fast, and doing them multiple times just worked better for people. So now we know. There's science around that, what's happening and why it's actually more powerful. This is one of my pet peeves. Elevated ketones are powerful. So when we look at the research around elevated ketones, here's the problem. The therapeutic levels don't happen for most people when they go, are just in ketosis. Or their glucose is still too high, so they still don't benefit from the ketones. You have to have low glucose and high ketones to get the benefits. So where do you see that? Fasting. Yeah, so a fasted state is really the key. And on Saturday, I'll talk a little bit about some of Thomas Seyfried's work in cancer, but that's how I figured out the max autophagy thing. I didn't figure out anything. I just took something that they were doing in cancer research and said, well, gosh, we could apply that to anybody and we should start doing that. He's like, yeah, that's a good idea. But they realized that when the glucose dropped to a certain point and the ketones would rise to a certain point, at a 1-to-1 ratio approximately, they would see tumors continuing to shrink. But the moment they started breaking away from that, if the glucose started coming up, the ketones started coming down, and move away from that 1-to-1 ratio, they would see the tumor stop shrinking. So they knew that they were some crossing into a max autophagy around that 1-to-1 ratio. And that's why my book talks about that. And it really is helpful to know, because then we can make some changes if someone's not hitting max autophagy. And it's the toxic people that never hit max autophagy until we detox them. They just can't get to that low glucose and ketones. See, look, the magic of what we're doing in our practices is putting this whole multi-therapeutic approach together. Yes, we're doing therapies that have the ability to fix the cell, downregulate genes. We're getting to where the real problem is. These chemical stressors that are stored in the deep tissue like the brain. And if you don't upregulate cell function, it's not real detox. It's like the scientists that, and I'm friends with many, they get that. It's like you can clear the colon and do all that stuff down there, but unless you upregulate what the cell was meant to do, you're not going to have a lasting detox effect. You have to fix those pathways that are broken in so many people. So you have to detox the cell. And then when we apply these ancient healing strategies, these feast-famine cycles, they have the ability to turn off our bad genes. They have the ability to change the microbiome. They have the ability to get rid of our bad cells and upregulate with stem cells new cells that aren't hyper-responding, driving autoimmune. Do you realize that most of America is inflamed and feels like crap just because their body's creating it? In some aspect of autoimmune is happening. We just don't diagnose it until it gets so bad. But the fact is that three-legged stool applies to everybody. Their genes are being triggered. The toxic load, their buckets are overflowing. And their microbiome is disrupted, disrupting their immune system. The problem is they're just waiting for that perfect storm to happen. And bam, that one stressor. But you know what? Here's the mistake. They think that's it. They think it was that one thing. Well, I know it's this because, when that happened, I got sick. And you have to convince them, no, look, it's just not just that. 20 years ago, you had exposure in a moldy home. 20 years ago, you had 2 different metals put in your mouth that creates a battery effect on the brain. It's a stress, and your body's adapting. Oh, and then you moved into a house with such an EMF load, with a smart meter, and then all of a sudden you got sick. But you wonder why you don't completely get well after you fix the EMF problem. That was the catalyst that the perfect storm created. But the fact is you still have a mouthful of infection. That root canal didn't make you sick, but now you won't get well without addressing that root canal. Does that make sense to you? Or you won't get well until you get the mercury out of the brain that you started accumulating in utero, right? The DRAS study shows the number of fillings, lady, in your mouth is proportional to how much is in the baby's brain. So now you're not going to get well until you get rid of that. So you have to unravel that perfect storm in everybody today. That's what the Platinum Program's about, because you have to have a team and knowledge to be able to do that and the proper protocols to follow a cavitation surgery or to go in before. What do you do before? We train on that stuff. But when you put it all together, the fasting strategies, the correct detox, and really dealing with the cell, and I can't wait for you to hear the talk on the 5 R's, because, gosh, I get excited. When I even realize, what's happened just recently in the last 2 years, it still points to the 5 R's as being something that was so absolutely amazing that God gave me. I'm telling you, I love to say it, I mean it. I'm not smart enough. No way, but that gives me confidence. There's no way a dyslexic, colorblind, insecure, we can stack them all up, but my identity's different now because I know I needed that to become what God needed me to be. Because that's how confident I am in the message, because I know He gave it to me. When I sat on that airplane, a lot happens on airplanes, God just gave me that because of my frustration of doctors not understanding it. And then the 5 R's came out. And knowing it's something that we needed as a roadmap to fix the cell. But when you put all of that together, geez, I come out of my skin. I want every one of you to know it to the level I know it. And the Platinums, man, they make me so proud because they know it. They're doing videos about it. I watch their videos. I'm like, hey, that's better than me. I love it. I love that. Energy diversion, before I move into that one, energy diversion, I think is so exciting. And I coined that term because of what I would watch happen. The body is so intelligent. It doesn't just sit on its extra energy. It takes massive amounts of energy to digest food, assimilate food at the cell, at the gut. But it doesn't just sit on that extra energy. No, it takes it and starts healing things. It uses the extra stem cells and the autophagy as its tools, and it knows that that kidney needed fixed, and it does it. Doctors, none of you are that smart. I have bad news. You're not. Matter of fact, the innate intelligence is so smart that it knows the order of what needs to be fixed first. Good luck to figure that out. But it does. It knows it. So one fast, you may get a pain here. The next fast, it's liver, your sacrum. I mean, your body is healing things, and it's taking the energy and diverting it into the healing that it knew it needed for survival. But here's the problem. Today's day and age, why doesn't it heal it? Because you're in survival mode. In a sympathetic reaction of survival, the body's utilizing that energy just to survive. It doesn't care about your knee pain in the course of survival. But when you give it the opportunity and rest it and give it a little more energy, it'll divert it to healing. It's amazing. And hormone optimization is a big one. When you look at that adaptation, so I already kind of gave you a little bit of this. When you look at what happens, why do we get such a growth hormone regulation? Well, because the body knows it needs its muscle, fight or flight. That's why when people say, oh, you lose muscle during fast, it's like it's nonsense. The body knows it can't. So what does it do? That's why it's crushing bad cells, because it maintains its muscle, so it raises up the growth hormone. And by day 5, in study after study, you watch it go boom, 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 boom. But day 1, you're getting growth hormone spikes. Day 1, your cells are becoming sensitive to the hormones, to the point where they have to burn fat. And they get so absolutely upregulated in teaching itself to use fat as energy because it has to survive. So that's why in multiple fasts, we teach the body cells to use fat as energy more and more efficiently. The word is metabolically flexible. But it doesn't happen in one fast. It doesn't happen in 2 months of ketosis. But when we put fasting as a strategy in our lives, daily, and more importantly, in these blocks, one time a year, Thomas Seyfried, if you had one fast, extended fast a year, you decrease cancer 95%. You decrease the risk of getting cancer 95%. So, I mean, these are strong reasons to fast yourselves, but also why you need it in the clinic. Resets the DNA. I already said that. Turns on longevity genes and turns off the bad ones. Part of the three-legged stool. Obviously, it heals the microbiome. It starves down bad good bacteria. We can repopulate good, but it resets the microbiome. Huge reason to fast. Autophagy, we're talking about, but you know, I always give this gentleman credit because he won the 2016 Nobel Prize for autophagy. And basically the cell's innate intelligence, how it will use the cellular rubbish for its energy. This man deserves a lot of credit in this because long ago, he was the one that answered the question for so many years we never could answer. The criticism of fasting, at least in the 90s and the 2000s, was the immune system got so low it's dangerous. Well, they said that because we see this massive drop in white blood cells. Well, this man showed what was happening. What happens is the body, again, in its wisdom, takes out all of the hyperactive white blood cells that we all have. Senescent cells, cells that live too long. And I've been testing my senescent cells. And things I'm doing is making it better and better, which you're going to hear Raphael on the future of medicine. Wait till you'll see that because you'll actually see my test. But the bottom line is this. You want to be healthy, live long. You have to get rid of these senescent cells. You also have to get rid of these cells that are, and typically they're senescent cells. They're driving inflammation, but they're over-hypersensitive. They're reacting. They're overreacting to the food you're eating, to the allergens. These are the bad guys that cause all the mischief in their own cells. Well, the only way we know to get rid of them, really, fast them down. So when Longo saw this drop in white blood cells, they realized it was from the autophagy. And what happens is it regulates the stem cell, and in his studies showed, especially about day 4, day 5, that you create new, naive white blood cells that aren't hyperreactive, driving inflammation, causing all the mischief. So, but here's the thing though. In Longo, at least one of his studies, and I think I have it, is it was a 5-day fast for 4 to 5 months. And that's how they got rid of the type 1 diabetes. Downregulated the autoimmune. The stem cells created new beta cells. That's incredible. But it didn't surprise me because clinically I see what multiple fasts can do. So it's our job to teach people the art. And what you're going to learn next is I'm going to bring 2 of my platinums up and they're going to show you how they're monetizing this in their clinic. Oh, that was the other problem in the 90s. How possibly can you run a clinic by fasting people? It's a distraction from the things in your practice that make the practice go, but yet it was the thing that you saw these amazing results. So that didn't work out. But we are doing better than monetizing it. We're changing our communities. These are the 5 things I want you to understand what drive autophagy. So fasting, of course it does, especially after 4 days. Therefore, our 5 is our goal. Restricted calories. Dr. Shane's going to talk a lot about this, but I learned about partial fasting. It was years ago. Frenchman, Albert Mazir, this guy water fasted many people, but would take them into this caloric restricted state with low protein and realized that it kept the fast going. And then people that had a lot of trouble fasting, he just did that on them. So he was the first one that I knew that was doing this, at least in a fasting clinic and a practice. And now Longo has perfected this idea of partial fasting. Now granted, I would say clinically, we see people hit more max autophagy with water fasting, but that doesn't mean you have to start there. It's typically better to start with one of these partial fast or the fasting mimicking diet. Prolong diet is what Longo's group has made popular. Low carb to some degree. Ketosis will create some autophagy. And lastly, low protein is a key. If you get over, on average, if you get above 20 grams of protein, you'll start shutting down autophagy pretty quickly. Probably fast. Longo feels that's the biggest one. So if you're a smaller person, even 15 grams is going to serve you better. And those are a day. So those 4 really rules are what drive the autophagy and most of the results of a fast. So these are the types of fasts. And of course, we don't have to talk about water. Whey water is something we used to use when it was easier to get. Hippocrates actually did that type of fasting. It's when they make cheese. It's this gold liquid that comes off and it's filled with electrolytes. And we didn't get a large glucose rise out of it, although there was some lactose in the product, which some people couldn't do because they were lactose intolerant. But it was a really good fast. Bone brothing has become popular. The only problem is there was a lot of histamines and some people were sensitive to that. See, this is why you need other tools, because not everyone can do the same fast. And then partial fast, I talked to you about already. Fasting mimicking diet is Longo's partial fast. And then dry fasting. How many of you have dry fasted? Oh, wow, that's a lot. Yeah, my son, Daniel's done 2 at 4 days, and I don't recommend it. It's really hard. But doing 1 or 2 days of dry fasting would be very beneficial because there is a 3-to-1 autophagy. So someone really smart, tell me, why do you get a 3-to-1 autophagy, meaning a greater amount of autophagy doing a dry fast, meaning you don't drink water, right, versus a water fast? Why do you think that is? You don't count. You know the answer. Exactly. Anyways, the answer is because it needs water to live, right? So when it needs water to live, it just starts crushing fat cells like crazy because they hold the most water. But here's the problem. Fat cells hold a lot of what? Yeah, exactly. So dry fasting can be very challenging. Fasting in general, the autophagy can be very challenging for very toxic people, right? So, and again, that's why you have to know what you're doing. Because when you release toxins, people don't feel well. But dry fasting, you do get a higher autophagy. So what I typically do when I do longer fast, a 5-day fast, I throw 1 or 2 days of dry just in that. And you'll see your autophagy numbers, your glucose just, and ketones fly up. So you hit like max autophagy, bam. And oftentimes I'll just start with a dry fast. When I fast, I listen to my innate intelligence. I drink when I'm thirsty, and I typically will know what days to dry fast. And I went, not this fast, the fast before, I think I went I went 2 days, and I still was not thirsty. And then finally my thirst kicked in and I drank. So, you know, there's a way you could add that in. Sometimes I do them at the end of the fast, sometimes I do it at the middle. And I really haven't found one way to be more beneficial. I just kind of go with the day I'm really not that thirsty. One day I went outside and I became thirsty for like 2 hours. And I said, I'm gonna ride it out. I shouldn't have went outside in the sun and I was sweating. I'm gonna ride out and see if my body goes through enough autophagy to take it away. And it did. It recovered. And it just and it's funny because that next day, I typically lose about a ½ pound a day. That day I lost like literally a 1.5 pounds, almost 2 pounds. So I definitely crushed the autophagy. This is the one I was telling you about, 5 days a month on the low calorie, 500 to 1100, low protein, low carb, high fat, 25 days of eating whatever they wanted. So they were doing 5 days a month, 25 days just standard American diet. 5 days a month, 25 days of regular eating. So anyways, the cool thing is the beta cells in the pancreas regenerated. And I told you that, and that's the actual study. Multiple extended fast. So I talked about this, why we do multiple fast. It's, well, here's some of the things. Those with insulin and glucose, struggling to control that. Multiple fasts, it's going to take that to fix them. It's not going to be one fast. Not losing weight, even in ketosis with the perfect diet. So that's a hormone issue. So again, what's going to correct that is multiple fasts. So when we take somebody on, our thing is like, look, our goal is not to fix you in 6 months to a year. Our goal is to teach you everything that you need to know to get your life back. The value is in the education you give them. And that's something we train on. Because see, as doctors, we think the value is in the result. It's not. Because if it took 25 years to get them there, you're doing them a disservice if you truly think you're going to get them well in that short period of time. Simple things, no problem. But to truly change their life, come on. You have to teach them this stuff. So we train on teaching them a multi-therapeutic approach, that they can do this as an art for the rest of their life. You know what? Some of you are my clients that are in this room, and they're still doing it. And now you're changing others' lives. So I've been blessed to change thousands of people from around the world, individually. But now we're changing even more than that because we have a group of us doing this. So, oops, did I hit that button by accident. Hormone dysregulation, that's part of why people can't lose weight. Low cellular energy, multiple fasts. The mitochondria is obviously there's dysfunction there. And it's going to take multiple fasts and detox, obviously, with all of these. Autoimmune, same thing. Cancer and fixing the gut. Those are the big ones where studies actually show you actually need multiple fasts. I love, when I talk about multiple fasts and how you get stronger and better each time, this story. So I was in a mastermind with Thomas Seyfried, the cancer doctor who wrote Cancer is a Metabolic Disease. Joe Mercola was there, Zach Bush, and some other really smart people, smarter than me. But I was blessed to be there for sure. But I had the opportunity to talk about, Joe was like, talk about fasting. When I first met Joe Mercola, he didn't believe in fasting, 0. And he was fascinated at this point. And he said, Dan, talk about what you're doing. Because they're in the lab. Tell them what you're doing. Tell them what you're seeing with fasting. And I started talking about it. And I started talking about, well, it's more multiple fasts. And I didn't know how Seyfried would take it because I didn't know that's what they did. And he said, yes, no, that's what we do. And he had another word for it called pulse press or something, where they move in the hard, right? They create ketosis hard into fasting states, out of them, into fasting states. I'm like, that's what we do. And anyway, so he said, oh, Dan, I got to send you this study. It's from so long ago. You could never find it. I'll send it to you. And he did. And it was Oscar the dog. So what happened is that they were doing the study on fasting just to find their primordial state, literally. So they were fasting dogs and seeing when they would die. They were measuring like what's happened to their nitrogen balance, and they were just seeing what happens right before they actually die. And they were gathering information. They wouldn't do this study today, would they? But they were doing it then. But here's what happened. There's a good part of the story. Because Oscar kept finding food. He was very clever. So he kept breaking the fast. He was a very bad patient. And he found food. And so, of course, they lacked dogs. So they throw Oscar in the next fast, the next one. But Oscar kept screwing it up and finding food after so many days. 20 days, Oscar. So the fact is finally, they keep Oscar not finding food. And they couldn't kill him. 101 days, Oscar was still jumping in and out of his cage. So what happened was, they studied what happened, like, what is Oscar, like, what's happening? And it was the fact that each fast was making him stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's so true. It's like, I can just stop, like the last fast, I never even got hungry ever once. It was just like one of those things that typically I'll get hungry when I'm used to eating day 1, maybe day 2. It's just so easy, and it's because I'm Oscar at this point. I'm not jumping in and out of my cage, but close. I go on with my day. I could work out, but I don't, because I choose to use the energy to just heal my body. I don't want to waste it in the gym. I don't. So I am a little old-fashioned in that fasting state, to utilize, rest the body. You have a time to rest, you have a time to go hard, time to rest. I think the fasting state is a time to rest. So Oscar was truly amazing. So I said that the only really way, the third leg of the stool, right, is we have to fix the gut. Most gut problems are autoimmune, even if they're not diagnosed, as I pointed out. It says the genetic switch turned on during fasting helps stop the inflammation in the autoimmune. So we know that multiple fasts is actually needed, though, to actually turn that process off. And I'm going to say this. This is why it's important to know how to measure max autophagy. It has to be a fast where they're actually hitting those good numbers. And once you start getting those types of fasts with people, that's why there's a process. And again, most of our really toxic patients, you have to get down the road and detox even before you hit those 1-to-1 or really good max autophagy ratios. But we need those types of fasts to turn off this gene. Okay, so what about extended fast beyond 5 days? And we look for certain things, knowing when the break fast is critical. So this is on page 132 to 137 in the book, where I talk about fasting beyond 5 days. The tongue is one of the things that you look at. When the tongue goes back to pink, it's time to break the fast. It's about 2 days after that is typically when you want to break. When hunger comes back, when weight loss stops for more than 2 days, time to break the fast. So I talk about it in the book, but there's times where you have to know. And of course, if you're doing blood tests, when the electrolytes drop to a certain point, even just below the abnormal on the standard scale that they give you, it's time to break the fast. But the body will give you symptoms before that. Who should not fast? Anyone that's afraid of it. Don't let them fast. Work them up to it first. Who should not fast? Well, pregnant women, definitely. It's too much stress. Fasting is stress, right? So we don't want to create more stress. Not a fan. Children, well, in the US it's definitely not considered normative, but in Europe it is. So a little different philosophy. So in the US, I wouldn't be fasting patients, children that are patients. And obviously people with eating disorders, not a good idea, because they tend to get addicted to every aspect of it, as you can imagine. So what to expect during a fast and common symptoms? Well, page 118 and 132 in the book, it gives you a day-by-day breakdown of day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. And of course, you can have these symptoms anyway. Weak, low energy, headaches, nausea, sleep, cold, right? I mean, all of these you've all experienced that have fasted, right? Of course, coated tongue. Those are all normal. But in those pages, you get way more information than that. Here's some other pages you could write down if you had these questions. So, how do I partial fast or water fast? Pages 103 to 110. What if I'm underweight and want to gain muscle? Yeah, pages 101 and 102. How to know when and if you are in max autophagy. Taught a lot about that. Write those pages down. There you go. Most common questions. What about my coffee? Can I take my supplements? Can I exercise? Pages 114 to 117. Hope that helps. 3 reasons you might not feel well during a fast. Low electrolytes is the number one. Some people just need a little bit of sea salt or just taking an electrolyte without sugar. Obviously helps. Not being fully fat adapted. Obviously that's why we have a month workup before the fast. And thirdly is neurotoxicity. And these are the fasting trio that we've learned. Binding the toxins in the gut, binding them in and around the cells, and these don't interrupt the fast, and then the molecular hydrogen, which actually increases autophagy. And okay, last word here on, and I'm going to bring my doctors up on the stage, but this is important to know. I started this by saying if you want to live longer, if you want to prevent the diseases, if you want to get people well, feast, famine. You have to know how to use these fasts. So of course there's weekly diet variation where we just start fasting them like a 5-1-1, which means we just do 1 day, 1 meal. But as important as the fast day is, so too are the feast days. So remember that. Where you fast, feast, famine is part of this adaptation the body adapts to, and that's where we get a lot of the hormone optimization from. So monthly, 5 days a month of a feast, high carb, and 5 days a month of a fast. We know, studies show, that it works better. Alternate day fasting involves the loss of adipose tissue and prevention of muscle loss. So why is that? It's the growth hormone. It's the hormone optimization that prevents muscle loss and why it's better for weight loss. So look at this study. Studies are showing that intermittent caloric restriction is better for weight loss, metabolic diseases, and anti-aging. So the cycling of caloric restriction, 500 calories, in this particular study, with normal eating, forced adaptation is believed to be the reason for the outcome. So in other words, when they looked at low fat, when they looked at low carbs, when they looked at a diet that was feast, famine, 500 calories, regular diet, 500 calories, it actually worked better. I actually interviewed Kristen Verde on Cell TV, and I said, Kristen, why? She said, well, we believe it's a hormone optimization occurs. So the body's adapting to that stress. And we get more stress when we go feast, famine. And that's what created that whole talk that I give on hormone optimization. It works. It works better than staying on one diet. You know what we're guilty of in this country? We have the ability to stay on one diet all the time. Same 8 healthy foods. It's not good for you. You have to seasonally change your diet, weekly and monthly. It's very, very important. And this is why it works. Adaptation is the magic. The more stress, I call it metabolic mitochondrial fitness. More stress equals more adaptation, equals more hormone optimization, equals more fat adaptation, and therefore more autophagy, and more importantly, more stem cell production, and that equals more healing. Does that make sense? That's why it works. That is exactly why it works. So what are we doing when we're going feasting and famine? We're actually creating a fitness regimen for the mitochondria. We're fixing them. We're forcing them. Bad cells don't adapt, and good cells get stronger and stronger and stronger. But how we do it is feast, famine, monthly, weekly, and even seasonally. I call it diet variation. It's really been my greatest breakthrough of understanding. All my years of fasting, I realized even why the people who would, gosh, they're still getting results, and they go back to their evil ways. And it's like, it's still working for them. If I could just, and again, if they would go back to even a healthier diet, even better. But what was working was the feast, the famine, creating the adaptation and the hormone optimization. And then this is something that I love. We take 5 days a month and feast them. I already taught you how to do it. Could be partial, could be water. Okay, this is magic, especially for premenopausal women, adrenal and thyroid cases, hormone in general. So it works best, ladies, 5 days before the cycle, for sure, if we feast you. Give you high carbs or high protein 5 days before your cycle. And the theory is that it increases insulin, and you need insulin to make a lot of these hormone conversions. So in other words, T4 to convert to T3, you actually need insulin in that conversion. And there's other hormones, the same thing. So we know that cravings occur the week prior because your body intuitively is saying, hey, I need carbohydrates to raise insulin to make better hormone conversions. And those with low thyroid, they are just on the edge and they need even more of that boost, but it works for people who don't. It just works better. But what it does is the rest of the month, you're more metabolically fit. It works every time. Oh, and then if you take it one more level and add 5 days a month of a famine, whether it's a partial fast or a water fast, you see what we're doing. Feast, famine. Oh, and then we have them on 4-2-1, which is 4 days in ketosis, 2 days of random 24-hour fasts. You pick them on your busiest days, and 1 day of feasting. So now we're doing feast, famine weekly. Now we're doing it monthly. And eventually, the hormones transform. The body goes into autophagy, stem cell. It gets more metabolically fit. It works. Oh, but wait. If you do that without the cellular detox and everything that we do in around the cell, well, then you have an upstream source and nothing works. So you see why we have to put these together. And if you miss one leg of the stool, it falls over. We're the only group in the world that's putting that all together. We really are. That's why I started it by saying we have something very unique. How do we put this into practice? So the new accelerator program actually, and if you're a platinum, obviously, you get to do this stenomic solution. And I want to bring Dr. Melissa and Dr. Duncan up on stage. If you want to come on up, guys.